It's my pleasure to introduce Carla Gomes, who, as you can see, is a professor of computer science at Cornell University. What this slide doesn't tell you that she's also a professor of information science and professor in the business school too, I believe. She got her PhD in Edinburgh, and she leads a center at Cornell for computational sustainability, and just got a big expedition grant, and can't wait to hear what she's going to say.
Well, thank you so much. Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for the introduction. And actually, I will start by thanking NSF. I'm really grateful that NSF is funding research in computational sustainability. So, we had, as Dan mentioned, we had an expedition, which are large grants, that allowed us to, plant the seeds to establish this field of computational sustainability. We created a variety of, conference, etc. And it was actually it has been really exciting and rewarding to see so many computer science actually eager to get involved in addressing computational sustainability. And so this is very exciting. The grant also allowed us to identify core directions and in terms of computer science and in terms of sustainability. Establishing or creating a field, you cannot do that in 5 years. And sustainability problems are really challenging. We are dealing with highly interdisciplinary problems, and this is fundamentally new territory for computer science. So, for us to try to sustain, to get a level where the field can really become self-sustaining, it is important and to have critical mass that we could not do with, little research, piecemeal research effort. So that's why I'm so excited that we got a second expedition to establish this ComSustNet, a large research network for expanding the horizons of computational sustainability. So a big thank you to NSF for that. So what is sustainability? I'm sure you've heard several, and sustainability is now becoming a word we are becoming familiar with. So computational sustainability is really, a new field that aims to develop computational methods to address sustainability issues. Our view is sustainability as sustainable development, and that notion actually was introduced in '87 by what it's called by the United Nations, the Brundtland Commission. Also, the report they produce is called Our Common Future. And they define sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising future generations. This definition was quite revolutionary at the time because there were, like environmentalists really emphasizing that we care about the environment and we don't even care about humans. And sustainable development, really, the notion was defined to say, no, sustainable development is not just about the environment or, energy or climate. Sustainable development really encompasses, balancing environmental, economic, and societal needs. So we share that view. And, because of the interdisciplinary nature and because we are dealing with, in general, complex systems, really, the unique scale and complexity of these systems, we are, as I said, dealing with complex systems, natural ecosystems, or man-made systems, and basically we are trying to understand, manage, and predict these systems. In order to do that, we need to collect large amounts of data, typically at multiple temporal and spatial scales, obviously dealing with uncertainty, And often there are many components, many agents involved with complex dynamics and even conflicting objectives, etc. So, these problems really involve significant computational challenge. That's, why we really need critical mass in this area, and we propose this large computational sustainability network for expanding the horizons of computational sustainability. So this talk is not really about CompSusNet, but because it just happened, I thought I should, talk a little bit about it. So this is a large-scale research network involving several U.S. academic institutions. Our original expedition the lead was Cornell with OSU, Bowdoin, and Howard, and now we also have UMass, Princeton. So let me, at OSU, Tom Dietrich is the PI, Bowdoin, Mary Lou Zeman, UMass, Dan Sheldon, Cornell, we are the lead, Princeton, Warren Powell, Carnegie Mellon, Zico Coulter, you may know some of these names, Howard University, Aziz, Georgia Tech, Bistra Dilkina, Vanderbilt, Doug Fisher, Stanford, Stefano Ehrman, Caltech, John Gregoire. So it is a large group of universities, and we also have several collaborators. We have several Gov and NGOs and international collaborators. So we, basically we propose different sustainability themes in terms of biodiversity and conservation, in terms of balancing environmental and socioeconomic needs, and energy and renewable resources, and in terms of computational thrusts. The themes are big data and machine learning, simulation, optimization, and dynamical models, and multi-agent systems and citizen science. So this network, we actually propose a large number of research projects and covering a wide range of sustainability applications. And the reason we do that is because, after all, we are also computer scientists, and if we want to build a coherent and cohesive computer science subfield, it's important that we develop methodologies and go deep in terms of cross-cutting computational problems and then apply them to sustainability areas. So I think it is really important for us to have a variety of domains so that we can develop methodology so the students can, are not going to really focus on a single application, but instead they develop methodologies and apply across different domains. And I will mention this a few times because I think that is really important to engage computer scientists. I mentioned, a key challenge is how to get involved in projects like sustainability because they are so interdisciplinary. And in order to try to help with that, this network actually is partnering with several centers of excellence that provide sustainability knowledge and infrastructure. For example, in conservation, we have the Nature Conservancy, we have the Secretary of Environment in Ecuador, Quito, Ecuador. We also have USGS, we also have, centers in Africa, for example, the ILRI, International Livestock Research Institute. Tom Dietrich is working with the Trans-African Hydrometeorological Observatory. I will talk a little bit about that. And in energy, we also have centers such as at Caltech, the Center for Artificial Photosynthesis, NIST, etc. So it's really important, which has been a bit of one of my key criteria, for us to embark in work on these problems, we really need to team up with domain experts who know, the domain, because the last thing we want to do is, try to address these issues when we really don't know what we are talking about. So it is important to partner with really these centers of excellence. So this talk, as I said, I'm not going to really focus on CompSustNet, but instead I thought of giving you a few examples of computational sustainability interdisciplinary research projects at Cornell. Then I'll talk a little bit about CompSustNet. In particular, I'll talk about this cross-cutting computational sustainability themes and community building and conclusions. So I will have a few examples concerning biodiversity and conservation, some concerning poverty mitigation in Africa, and for energy I will talk about materials discovery for solar fuels. So biodiversity is the diversity of life. And, when it comes to research in biodiversity, one key question is understanding how different species are distributed across landscapes over time. So that is really a key question. And in order to do that, we now have a variety of ways of collecting data, all kinds of sensors. But, interestingly, perhaps one of the key sensors that, I forgot to say that the key sensors that by far outperforms other sensors, in particular when it comes to recognizing species, is the human sensor. So Cornell has this amazing program, the Lab of Ornithology, or Lab of O, that's how we refer to Cornell, eBird, that is a citizen science program that empowers everyone interested in birds to contribute to research, and so you can submit observations, and no matter if you are an expert or not, or if you are 80 years old or 80 years old. So it's really a program that encourages people to contribute to research. And this is very important because it does increase our scientific knowledge. And this is a way of us gathering important data about species. And then we can use these results for conservation action. And I will give some examples of that. And of course, it increases scientific literacy. I always mention the example that for example, James Watson started his career when he was a 7-year-old as a bird watcher. So eBird actually has over 150,000 volunteer birds, and they have submitted over 200 million bird observations. I mean, this is, if you look at the time they put hours of field work, this is quite nice. And it is important because really these observations are very meaningful. And so we combine, this data with environmental data and with adaptive spatial temporal models. We can relate the environmental predictors to observe patterns of occurrence and absence of species. So what you see here is the patterns of occurrence of this barn swallow for different months of the year. So this is actually, for the first time now, we can produce these hemisphere scale bird distribution models. And actually we have developed, Daniel Fink is really the lead on the models for the species distribution models. And this led to, for example, the State of the Birds report that is officially released by the Secretary of Interior. And this provides really detailed distribution models about the several, over 400 species. This, and I'll talk about this, the fact that now we have these models, this information, we can now think in terms of using novel approaches to conservation. This is actually...
How do you deal with the fact that the observations are not IIT because they're made by people where they are?
Yeah, yes, that is a big challenge. Exactly, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Yes, indeed, very good question. That is, indeed, we have to deal with the fact that they have different even levels of expertise. We have kids submitting the data or, experts. And in fact, for a long time, the community biologists would just say, no, we are not going to rely on this because this is just bad data. And, but you saw the numbers. It really makes, it is an important source of information, but indeed, it's a very challenging task to try to correct for that. For example, and here, what you basically, the approach is to use these ensemble models and really use, these stickles, spatial temporal boxes to try to correct for that. But it is a big challenge, and I'll get back to that. For example, Steve Phillips and Dudik and Rob Shapiro have worked on, they developed this system called MaxEnt, and the system is based on the max entropy, so it is good for what we call presence-only data, when you only know, when people report what they saw, not what they saw and what they didn't see. So here we actually use both. But, there are many challenges, and Pedro immediately identified some, but including, one is how can we engage citizen sciences? And, we are working on that, basically thinking in terms of recommender systems. And, this problem, you can actually, in a simple way, you can formulate this problem as a probabilistic maximum coverage problem. And if you have the objective function that you want to minimize, basically recommend places where you maximize the expected number of species, let's say with a constraint that, for example, here, let's say someone is considering these different sites, and then we are going to suggest the sites that will maximize the expected number of species, assuming that you just want to see 3 sites. So, but, one key problem is in this problem. It is how biased the data are. And that is, a real issue because, people are just volunteering their time. So they are going to, but I have to say, bird watchers, they are fanatic about, they love, they really, that's they plan vacations to do that. And they like, games and competitions, etc. So if you look at this map, actually this map is maybe, I think now it's a little better, but you can see how biased the submissions are. And in fact, you see here you can even almost identify the urban areas. And so how can we try to correct for that? So how can we try to incentivize citizens to go to visit undersampled areas? So that is one problem that we are working on. And basically, we are using this, framework that is, if you are familiar with principal agent framework, basically the idea is you have an organizer, and the organizer, let's say eBird, they want to incentivize the agent so that they are going to set the incentives to induce the behavior so that they go to undersampled areas. So this is what we call the pricing problem. So we have this game that we call, in fact, we started this pilot very successfully. So it is heavy caching, you can Google it. And basically, right now we are doing this only in 2 counties in Tompkins counties and another, in Ithaca. And basically, the incentives we give to the birders are just points. But then, we have a lottery, and they get points, but then they still have leaderboards, and for each we create several sites that had 0 observations before, no observation had been submitted, and so we have this lottery, and now, the problem is how should we set the prices so that the agents, and we know the agents are also self-interest, they are following their interests, and we know that a key component of their interest is, seeing birds, but, we put additional rewards for them to get binoculars. So how should we set the incentives to induce the behavior so that we end up with a more uniform distribution? And so this is a very interesting problem. And in fact, this is a bi-level optimization problem. We have here the optimization of the organizer, and we actually are formulating the agents. The agents are solving a knapsack problem. They want to collect observations. Their utility is, the intrinsic joy of seeing birds, plus the rewards that we are using to I can only think of a word that's not, to incentivize them to do go to serve scientific purposes. And so there's this, this is called the pricing problem, the problem that setting the incentives that the organizer has to do. And then there's also the identification problem where we need to learn the preferences. So I actually was planning to do a few more slides, but I ended up not having time. But, what's interesting about Yeshan is actually my student, and he came up with a very interesting, trick where, the knapsack, if you think of the knapsack as a dynamic programming, then you can translate the dynamic program into a set of inequalities. Therefore, you can fold this problem into the problem of the organizer, and you end up with a single optimization problem. Of course, now, it's not, we are approximating the solution of the knapsack, but, humans are not good at solving problems anyway, so I don't think that we are losing much. In fact, it's not clear that humans do as well as dynamic programming. So this is an interesting computational problem. So now let me talk about, please interrupt me if you have questions. Now the question is, how do we protect habitat for species? Well, one of the key causes of biodiversity loss is known. It has to do with habitat loss for the species and fragmentation due to urbanization and deforestation and agriculture. So biologists really believe that it is important to maintain landscape connectivity. And here you have this, in fact, this got me to this problem. Back in 2006, there was this interesting article in the New York Times about this Y2Y project trying to link Yellowstone and to Yukon to create a corridor for grizzly bears and other animals. And so the wildlife corridors really, protect against fragmentation. They link core biological areas, but unfortunately, in general, there are very limited budgets, and we are interested in trying to maximize the environmental benefits for the species. Potentially also, if this is a densely populated area, obviously taking into consideration, social factors. So we actually worked on this, a part of this problem, trying to link, So our project was really to design corridors for the grizzly bears in the Northern Rockies, the U.S. Northern Rockies, connecting these three: Yellowstone, Glacier Park, and the Salmon Selway ecosystem. So, and here, you know, we assume that by now we know the distribution of the grizzly bears, that, for example, what we did with the bird distributions, and know the habitat suitability. We also have information about cost. So we can now model this problem as what we refer to as a connection subgraph problem. So you have these three reserves, and now you want to find a subgraph of G that contains the reserves, like 1, you know, it is 1, 6, and 7. It is connected. It is it's not beyond your budget, because you have a budget constraint, and you want to maximize some utility for the bears. You want the bears to be happy and maximize this solid. This is, you know, an NP-hard problem, but, you know, this is a worst-case result. It doesn't mean that, you know, we know often the real world possesses structure, so we can actually exploit and scale up solutions. So if we if we consider just the mean cost, rather than trying to maximize utility, we just want to find the mean cost. This problem is actually, you know, the mean cost Steiner tree problem, and we can it's fixed parameter tractable, and in fact we can find a solution for three reserves. But now, if we really want to maximize utility, now this problem, we do have scalability issues. We actually studied this just briefly here. The problems get really hard around, you know, the minimal budget, as we would expect. But, you know, I don't want to, if you have technical questions, I go in detail. Otherwise, I think I'd rather give you the big picture. But, I mean, as we know, and this is a common issue, we know that representations really matter. And, for example, we can model this as a single commodity flow problem, which is straightforward encoding, and it is a compact encoding, or we can use more complex or you know, actually encodings that have an exponential number of constraints to actually capture the connectedness structure of the network. And, you know, the advantage is often these encodings actually provide good upper bounds. Well, with this, we actually were able, and with many other strategies, we were able to find good solutions and actually argue for the mean cost, the optimal solution, and even for the optimization problem, we could find near optimal solutions with guarantees, and the reduction in terms of costs was quite dramatic. So that's when, you know, we were actually, after that result, we were contacted by the Rocky Mountains to actually work with them to expand our study and consider multiple species, etc., which leads to, you know, different problems. And this is an interesting aspect, because, you know, now if you have multiple species, you actually cannot just ignore that they have different requirements. And this is actually, I mean, this is a minor point, but it's a big point that I want to make. If you study these problems and you really look at, consider the uniqueness of the problems, often actually that will, you know, lead to advances for computer science. And for example, here we propose new models for the Steiner tree to consider the multigraph problem. We also have Games. Actually, this effort is led by David Schneider, and the vision is to actually have a little travel museum on computational sustainability, where you learn about sustainability, but along the way you also learn a bit about algorithms. Here is another problem, actually. This is when we worked on reserve design for bird conservation, and in particular for this red-cockaded woodpecker. I have to confess, it took me forever to even be able to pronounce the name, so we would just say RCW. And this is a federally endangered species. We worked with this conservation fund, and the population today is estimated as about 1% of the original stable population in this area. And so the conservation fund would like to, so they are managing this preserve called the Palmetto Pear Tree Preserve, and they would like to increase the population level of the RCWs. And so there are many options in terms of managing these populations, such as, for example, buying land adjacent to the areas where the RCWs are now, building artificial cavities. It takes, I think, 6 years for them to build a cavity, so they, biologists discover that it does help. They are not as good as the ones built by the birds, but still it is a good help to build the artificial cavities, or you can also do translocation of birds. So we modeled this, inspired by work that people have done here, as how can we influence cascades in networks. But here, there has been a lot of work in terms of networks. We cannot ignore the dynamics of the bird. So we need to really consider the biological and ecological model, and then we need to couple this with a system that is going to manage the decisions in terms of land acquisition, the cavities, etc. So this leads really to a stochastic diffusion model. And so we modeled this maximizing the spread of cascades, coupled with, this optimization model. And our goal is to maximize the expected number of surviving RCWs. So these problems are really very hard, especially if now you want to scale up for, long-term horizon. And, scaling it up, these problems is very challenging. We use techniques, some sample approximation, but these are hard problems. And obviously, and I like, in fact, when my students work on problems, they are not allowed to just work on a problem. They have to go and find other problems and relate in sustainability or other areas. And obviously, there's been work by Pedro and others on, maximizing spread in terms of networks. We are also interested in, for example, minimizing the spread for invasive species, for example, and other species. So one key message that I want to put forward is that, really this computational sustainability is a bit of a two-way street. Of course, we can and should, import amazing ideas that have been developed in network design. But, as I mentioned before, the specific features of our problems, we should take them seriously, and that also leads to new models for computer science that then can be used for other applications. For example, Dan Sheldon has really pushed these cascade models, and now they are being used for other applications. So I mentioned that, now that we have a better distribution, understanding of how species are distributed, we are able to have novel models for dynamic, what we refer to as dynamic precision conservation. And this is a very exciting new model for conservation that TNC is leading this effort, and in collaboration with Cornell, with the Lab of FO, because now we can provide very good models, distribution models. Now, basically, they are trying to exploit these agriculture opportunities with combinatorial resource auctions to protect waterbirds in California against the severe droughts. And so the idea is that, the farmers submit bids to keep water in the rice fields, so to keep the rice fields flooded, during the bird migration. So, this is much less expensive than just buying land. You couldn't do that. And, it is quite effective. And this is only possible because we are now using more, advanced, sophisticated computational models. But obviously, these are also challenge computational problems. We have other projects. Now I'm talking about ComSustNet, for example. One project that I think it's very exciting, very challenging is, designing a socio-ecological corridor in Ecuador for an umbrella species that is the Andean bear. That means it is a species that the requirements of that species will encompass the requirements for many other species. So by targeting that species, we are automatically considering several species. But, it is very challenging because contrarily to Montana, that is not, the population is not densely populated, these areas really are the local communities actually depend on the forest. So you really need to factor in socioeconomic factors to make sure that you are going to improve their way of life. So this is important. We also have some projects in Africa. In fact, this project actually is led by OSU and the Trans-Africa Trans-Africa Hydrometeorological Observatory, And, the situation here is contrarily to, for example, the US, where we have amazing, data and maps that allowed us to predict bird distributions, combining the birds' observations with environmental data. That's not the case in Africa. The maps are very poor. In fact, for example, insurance companies are not willing to insure farmers because there's no weather data. So the goal is to deploy over, these low-cost weather stations and these 200,000 low-cost weather stations in African schools. And, this is a very interesting problem, a sensor network problem, because not only do you want to, guarantee coverage, you want to, have a robust solution, which, because we are using low-cost weather stations, that is a challenge. We also have another project. We had a pilot where it is similar to the avi caching project, but here, the pastoralists, which, if you are Portuguese, that word is normal, but Bart always tells me people don't know what, not necessarily, that's a herder. So herders actually are collecting data and submitting an image for us. So this is similar to the avi caching with the birds, except here we actually give them money, little money, but for them it is important. But again, even there we need to be careful because we don't want to subvert them. They should be pastoralists or herders, etc. But it's very exciting, and we got good results. A lot of submissions in a very short time. Obviously, another challenge is climate. Actually, this work was led by a group, the American Museum of History, and Theo Damolas was involved, and Steve Phillips. And basically, they did a study. The challenge is, because these distributions are habitable, how can you make predictions? In fact, they could not go beyond 2050, and basically, they showed the greening of the Arctic. So, let me now talk about this a completely different project, but I think it is also a very exciting project, and basically, this has to do with accelerating discovery for new materials. Actually, the White House had started this initiative, the Materials Genome Initiative, really with the goal of accelerating the pace of discovery. And this is quite exciting for computer science, and I honestly think that we can revolutionize this area the same way we had an impact in sequencing the genome. So, and actually in 2010 there was a report by the Department of Energy that stated that existing energy approaches will not be enough to secure our energy future. Meeting the challenge will require scientific breakthroughs in new materials. So we are working with Caltech and Cornell, the Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis and the Cornell High Energy Synchrotron, and the goal is to accelerate the development of solar fuels. So basically, you see here the big advantage of solar fuels is that you can actually produce them and store them. So that is really exciting. So let me give you the big picture of how material sciences work, and this is what it's called actually combinatorial material discovery. And thanks to that name, that's how I got into this. Because somebody mentioned combinatorial and my antennas got all excited, but it's also high throughput. Some of them actually don't like the name because apparently that is more applicable for the case of drugs, pharmaceutical drugs. So, but material science have devised ways of simultaneously synthesizing thousands of materials. So here you see, 3 guns sputtering. There's a silicon wafers, 3 metals, and this is similar to atomic spray painting. They also devised ways of rapidly characterizing thousands of materials using X-ray diffraction. Here, actually, Ron, my student, is using the synchrotron, and you see here is actually, you cannot see very well, but that is the detector capturing. And here we integrate the beam intensity, and we have the spectral rate. So what is the challenge? The challenge is that they would like to be able to rapidly determine the crystal structure of the materials based on the patterns. So let me try to explain. This is, as I said, it's actually not complicated. Basically, now I'm representing the wafer, a ternary representation in terms of the composition, and each point here is a sample. So basically, I got an X-ray diffraction pattern, and you see the pattern here. So I'm stacking the patterns here, okay? And so what I would like to do is, based on all the X-ray diffraction patterns, I would like to solve the inverse problem and be able to identify the different crystal structures. For example, here there's I just made up, this is like what it's called FCC, or face-centered cubic crystal structure. I would like to infer this based on this. So that is the problem. Does it make sense so far? Please, if you don't have questions, don't hesitate to ask. So this is what it's called the crystal structure map problem. Why is this so challenged? Well, because as you see, for example, here, often the X-ray diffraction patterns correspond to a mixture of crystal structures. Right.
What exactly is on the X and Y axis of the X-ray diffraction?
Oh, that is the diffraction angle, you know, the diffraction angle, and here is the beam intensity, okay? And so it is challenged to unmix. For example, you may have one pattern that is a combination like this one. If you see here, like this region has this pattern, and you know that two data points are similar even though they are shifted. That is still allowed. That is part of the similarity notion. They can be shifted. So here you see these points. We have these points for this phase or this region. Now we have here these points for this region, and you see in the middle, these guys are literally a combination of this pattern plus this pattern. You see this. Does it make sense? So here is the problem. We have the input, we have the X-ray diffraction patterns. We have additional physical characteristics because we know the physics of how the light is diffraction, these diffraction patterns. For example, the peaks can shift, and they are still, in fact, they can shift up to about, you know, they told us the upper bound is 15%, in general it's not as much, but they can shift, and actually that has important meaning physically. And the phases have to be connected. For example, I could not have this phase and interrupt here and the phase. No, they have to be connected, a connected component. So, and there are several, you know, constraints that are really capturing the physics of the phenomenon. So, you know, you can think of this as a clustering. It is a clustering problem. In the end, you want to cluster the points so that they are similar, where your notion of similarity is, for example, if they are shift, they are still similar, etc. Does it make sense? Well, this problem is hard, actually, even if we don't have the experimental noise, I have to say, sorry, if we don't have experimental noise, and if we see our sample has every example of a pure phase, this problem actually can be solved in polynomial. So this can be, you can solve this as a clustering problem, but indeed, you know, the clustering is good at giving you the big picture, but it really fails to enforce the physical constraints. So we encoded this as a rigorous, model with all the physical constraints, etc., and obviously this doesn't scale up. So then we actually encode this problem using SFTs, you know, satisfiability theories extended with, this quantifier-free linear integer arithmetic theory, and we were pleased to see that actually the results were very good, and we could, for example, you can use NMF, but NMF really performs poorly, for example, because NMF does not deal with shifts, etc. But our solution, basically here, you see these are the different crystal structures, the different phases, some overlap, and this is what we could recover, which is pretty good. But unfortunately, this still takes time, and so we realized that it is important for us to combine different approaches, including we could use a human computation approach to try to really improve the performance of the problem. And in fact, you know, I have done some work on backdoors, and basically a key question that we had was, can we use minimal human input to try to identify hidden structure? What do I mean by hidden structure? Well, just here is a problem where you want to solve this problem. This is a Latin square, like a Sudoku, but without all the constraints, and you want to solve this. And if I solve these problems, you see they are exactly the same instance, but I'm just using a randomized complete solver, and you see that there's a huge variance. This takes a long time. We actually had to stop it. So how do, in fact, this is a heavy tail distribution, meaning that, you know, even though in 50% of the cases I could solve this with one backtrack or less, you know, if I have the sample mean, as I increase the number of runs and I take the average of the runtime in backtracks, it keeps going up and up because this is a heavy tail distribution. So how do we explain, you know, these short runs? You know, so basically this is the notion of backdoors. We formally define that, but the intuition is, you know, if your solver gets lucky and finds the right set of backdoors, once it's like when you are packing. You know, you kind of know you put first the big items and then at the end the little socks, etc. But, you know, solvers in general, they are doing this with randomization. We have not been able to understand semantically, but it's quite remarkable. Here you have this formula, and, you know, 16 variables are enough to solve. If you focus on 16 variables, and after setting 5, you know, the complexity goes away. And here you have 3 that are enough to show this problem isn't set.
Are these circuit design problems or?
These are logistics planning problems, actually. So now the question is, can we do this for this problem? And basically, we crowdsourced this problem, and what we did is, here is, for example, for this point, the spectrogram, but we can also represent it where basically we use this heat map where this captures the intensity. For example, you see this is greener because this is the highest peak. Does it make sense? And we stack them, and now we ask people to look at these patterns and focusing on this line, for example, and tell us if they see any pattern. We give a little tutorial, actually, but they are not expected to have any a priori information about material science. They just need to, we tell them what we mean for things that are similar. We say, well, blobs that have the same lengths, starting and ending at the same point, not necessarily the same color or intensity. And, you know, they mark these patterns. And we discover that by doing this, basically our solver, by passing this information captured by the humans, minimal input, we are not talking about a lot, we could go from 13 hours of computation to 1,000 seconds. That was quite remarkable.
Couldn't you have done it with computer vision?
Good question. Well, that is, we are trying. That is obviously one thing, but it is very hard because that is in the end solving the entire problem. And the problem is, remember, we don't have label data here, so it is very tricky. So
you have the label data that they can computation generated.
But in general, not necessarily good. I don't know how good that. And in fact, let me quickly tell you, just because I should wrap up. For example, for this real system, actually this is a system, the prior data, and we have that data, is actually synthetically generated. For that we have. But it is, you know, because it is synthetically generated, the noise is not, we need a better noise model. The real one, and it actually, apparently from the Cornell, the synchrotron, it is not very, it's quite noisy. So then the humans really, the performance, we realize that actually often we don't even want the input they provide. But there are cases, and here is a case where you clearly see, you know, these all peaks are together. I mean, you don't need to, this is not rocket science. However, the algorithms get completely confused, and overfitting and trying to explain, you even detected peaks, but you can tell this is just noise from the wafer. It's background noise. The humans are good at immediately discarding this. And by, in fact, 84% of the participants could identify this as a single pattern, which translates, this is a single phase. And in fact, by doing this, that allowed us to, characterize this system. And in fact, it is the best characterization they have, where that slice really says this is a single phase. Don't try to see here different phases. And NMF does it poorly, but even our own other encodings also would not mark that as a single phase. So, and our collaborators, here is a nice characterization of the system where I use 3 slices to basically characterize the main structures of this problem. This is what they call the FCC. It is this an interesting combination where palladium and rhodium are basically, the rhodium is replacing the palladium, and what happens is there's this shift, you can see a shift in terms of the pattern, so which has actually important meaning in terms of understanding the physics and the catalytic behavior. So they actually discovered, a good catalytic catalyst for methanol oxidation that is actually the best known platinum-free catalyst for methanol oxidation. So, this problem requires a combination of strategies. One area that I think is very interesting is, in fact, we are already doing a bit of that. We are going to what's called the materials project, where we incorporate all kinds of data that is known. But, for example, we would love to get data from existing scientific literature, and which is now it has to do with the NLP problem, and but that could really dramatically help us, because we could provide background knowledge in terms of known phases. For example, this is a binary system, what's known, etc. So, and basically one key message that I try to emphasize is the importance of identifying cross-cutting computational themes. And, for example, this problem that I talked about is actually computationally similar to the problem, or another problem that we are interested in, which is the elephant listening project. And there we want to detect elephant calls from recordings to monitor elephant populations. They are completely different, but computationally they are, dimension reduction problems, and they are similar. And in fact, our approach is really students should work on different projects, and that is very important. And what you will see, we actually use these subway lines, and basically here you see. Here is the blue line. The blue line is the pattern decomposition in big data, and we have several projects: the high throughput material structure, elephant call detection, high throughput phenotyping, etc. And we have other lines. We are, for example, we have citizen science, etc., etc. But given the time, I will just, go straight to the end. We have other activities. Community building is actually an important part of the CompSusNet. And to summarize, computational sustainability is really a two-way street. On one hand, we hope to inject computational thinking in terms of providing new insights and solutions to these problems, and hopefully have societal impact. But on the other hand, we, from the sustainability, we have, we get new challenging problems, and also new formalisms and concepts from other disciplines. And often we actually have a tendency to say, oh yeah, well, of course computer science are going to help with the sustainability researchers, but what about, but what are we going to get? And I have to tell you, actually, a lot. And they have thought about problems, for example, dynamical models, or even, for example, we have Stefan work on this fishery problem to manage a fishery. And, you know, they have thought about those problems. So they have very rich models. Often the models are not strong computationally. That's where we come in. But we can actually, you know, incorporate these models, or, you know, study these models. For example, now we are studying dynamic discrete choice model, which is, you know, okay, I should wrap up. So, in summary, I think that computational sustainability has the potential to advance the state of the art of computer science, and